Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Sir, may we please call Mr. Knight?
Just before you do that, I need to make a public announcement. Yesterday, I caused the inquiry team to notify Mr. Smith, who is due to give evidence tomorrow, and co-participants, that it would not be possible for Mr. Smith to give his evidence on account of there being significant disclosure of documents over the last number of days which were relevant to his evidence. I want to stress publicly that the members of the inquiry team are working extremely hard to ensure that when they are faced with late disclosure, they assess the relevance of the documents in the hope that a witness to whom the documents relate will be able to give evidence as scheduled. In most instances, happily, that has occurred. However, as everyone now knows, from time to time, that is not possible. And it was not possible in Mr. Smith's case to deal with upwards, as I understand it, of 700 documents in the time available between the disclosure of those documents and Mr. Smith's evidence tomorrow. As I have said repeatedly, fairness demands that witnesses see relevant documents in good time to digest them and understand them before they give their evidence to the inquiry. As it happens, no great damage has been caused by this latest episode, save for the loss of 1 day of the inquiry's time, because Mr. Smith can return at a later stage, as was always anticipated that he would. And so instead of his giving evidence over 2 days, his evidence will be given over 1 day at some suitable date in the new year. Thank you, Ms. Price. Over to you.
Thank you, sir.
Take the Bible in your right hand. Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Knight. My name is Emma Price, and as you know, I will be asking you questions on behalf of the inquiry. Could you confirm your full name, please?
It's Christopher Granville Knight.
Thank you for coming to the inquiry to assist it in its work and for providing a statement in advance of today. You should have in front of you a hard copy of that statement. It is dated the 23rd of October 2023. Do you have that statement?
I do, yes.
And if you can turn to page 41 of that, please.
Yes.
You should have a copy with a visible signature, is that right?
That's correct.
And is that your signature?
It is, yes.
Are the contents of that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
For the purposes of the transcript, the reference for the statement is WITN 082901000. Starting, please, Mr. Knight, with an overview of your career at the Post Office. You've worked for the Post Office since 1983, is that right?
That's correct.
And you remain employed by the Post Office today?
I do, yes.
In the last 40 years, you have held a range of roles, including postal officer roles, various investigator roles, and now a role within the intelligence team, is that right?
That's correct.
You say in your statement that in 1997 you applied and were promoted within the Post Office Investigation Department from a postal officer role to an assistant investigation officer. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
And you held this role until the year 2000.
Yes.
What kind of investigations were you involved in when you held this assistant investigation officer role?
It was working for a Post Office Investigation Department, which was a sort of corporate investigation department that sat over the business. And initially, I was in a team Well, my first inquiries we did was regarding postage, reused postage stamps, counterfeit stamps, things like that. And then I moved on to a team. I think there was 6 of us, and we looked at losses of special delivery items over the Royal Mail network. So it sort of covered the country.
You say in your statement that when you were in this role, the Post Office Investigation Department underwent a structure change and changed its name to the Post Office Security and Investigation Service. How did your role change when these structural and name changes came in?
There was the name change. That was a major change. And then I think it was in 2000, there was an options to move into other parts of the business, and I ended up moving to a newly formed part of the business called Cash Handling Distribution, which was an amalgamation of the cash centres and the in-house cash in transit business.
And when you moved into that role, you say you were a lead investigator, is that right?
I think I was the only. I think there was 2 of us who went over. We were the only investigators. The previous, or the current, as they were, security managers were physical security managers.
Is it right that your investigations in this role focused on possible criminal offences involving the in-house cash in transit service and cash centre staff?
Yes, that's correct.
And you say the role soon became one of physical security, is that right?
It became, dual, yeah.
You stayed in this role until around 2003,
2003, 2004, I think, yes.
at which point you took up a role as an investigator for the Post Office, investigating possible criminal offences within the network.
That's correct.
And this related both to directly managed branches, formerly Crown Office branches, and also the branch network. Is that right?
That's correct.
Your job title when you were an investigator during this period was Investigation Manager?
Yes, There was sort of, I think it sort of changed, but ultimately it was the same job. There were just different titles, fraud investigator or whatever.
And you were doing the job of an investigator?
Yes, yeah.
And this was a role you held until 2016 when you moved to your current role in the intelligence team?
That's correct.
Is it right that in your current role you have no involvement in internal investigations?
There aren't any, yes, correct.
Turning please to the training you received as an investigator. In 1997, when you first started as an assistant investigator officer, did you have any experience of criminal investigations?
No.
Is it right that you recall attending a 3-week residential training course when you took up the role?
Yes, I believe it was 3 weeks.
You say in your statement at paragraph 5 that you recall this covering the Police and Criminal Evidence Act codes of practice and the relevant investigation forms that were used to ensure adherence to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. Do you recall disclosure obligations being covered on that initial 3-week course?
I can't say that I remember it fully. It was 97, so I apologise for that. There were, I think as I've stated, there were disclosure forms that were part of the sort of plethora of forms that were used in investigations. So it would have been covered within that, I believe.
So you recall being introduced to the forms on that initial training course?
Yeah. And the disclosure, yeah.
You did some study in 1999 and 2000 as part of an NVQ Level 4 in investigation, but you didn't end up completing that qualification, is that right?
Yes, yeah. I started it, I believe, when I was in POID, and my line manager was the assessor or mentor or whatever. But when I moved over to CH Cash and Distribution, CH&D, there wasn't many investigations, so you had to sort of cover certain aspects of an investigating role. So it sort of got prolonged, and then I got towards the end, and it never got sort of finalised. But
You then had some cash handling and distribution specific training in the year 2000, is that right?
it would have been around the yes.
When you started in your role as an investigation manager for the Post Office, and so I think you say that was around 2003 or 2004,
I think so, yeah.
were you given any refresher training on criminal investigation?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 10 of Mr. Knight's statement? That is page 7 of WITN 082-90100. In the context of the role of investigation manager, you say this: during this time, although I cannot recall exactly when, I attended Chesterfield Future Walk Building to receive counter training. The training would have given a basic understanding of Horizon, i.e. how the system performed transactions, not data analysis. There was also a refresher course where we were tasked with working in the DMBs for 3 days during the Christmas period, and again when we were tasked with covering strike action in the DMBs, so those are directly managed branches.
Yes.
Possibly 2006 to 2008, I cannot recall exactly. We also received training on security equipment at various times when I was within POL, as the role covered both investigative and physical security. I also recall Cartwright King giving specific training which covered notebook use, interviewing, and disclosure to solicitors at interview. The Cartwright King training you refer to here, is that the Cartwright King training which happened in 2013, which is addressed in a number of emails sent to you by the inquiry for the purposes of
I think
preparing the
it
statement?
it would be latterly, yes.
You address at paragraphs 44 and 45 of your statement the refresher training that you do recall receiving, dealing with interviews and taking statements. Could we turn, please, to page 18 of this statement? Paragraph 47. And you say this: investigators had a duty to investigate a case fully. During an investigation, any evidence, information that came to light would be looked and assessed and reported, whether it pointed to or away from the suspect. Also, every line of inquiry that was reasonable would be followed. I would have been aware of this process through the policies that were in place and training that was provided, although I can no longer remember the specifics. So you are clear, are you, that you understood when you were an investigator that you had an obligation to pursue lines of inquiry which pointed away from the guilt of a suspect, as well as towards?
Yes.
Going over the page, please, to paragraph 49. You say here, as mentioned previously in this statement, the investigator disclosure obligation would be discharged by completing the various PO SEC disclosure forms 006 A, B, C, and D. I would have been aware of the disclosure forms from the policies that were in place, although I can no longer remember the exact policy in place during my time in the team. I also received training when I joined the team, as well as guidance from the legal team. You refer here to the investigator disclosure obligations.
Mm-hmm.
Could we have on screen, please, a document provided to you by the inquiry for the purposes of preparing your statement, which governs the disclosure of unused material to the defence? The document reference is POL 001 04762. This document is dated May 2001, which we can see at the bottom. And we can see from the title at the top that it refers to the Criminal Procedures and Investigations Act 1996 Codes of Practice. Did you recognise this document when it was sent to you by the inquiry?
Yes, I did. The content of it, I don't know whether it was this particular one, as in the date, but yeah, I recognise them.
Do you think it was provided to you when you were an investigator?
I would suggest it was available, yes, and provided.
Under purpose, the document says this: the aim of this policy is to ensure that security managers know and understand the investigation procedures in relation to the disclosure of unused material as described in the Criminal Procedures and Investigations Act 1996 Codes of Practice, which must be adhered to by all consignia staff undertaking investigations. You refer in your statement to the inquiry to the Criminal Procedures and Investigations Act governing the conduct of your investigations. At the time you were an investigator, were you aware of the Criminal Procedures and Investigations Act Code of Practice?
Yes, I believe it was. I think it might have been a little book.
Were you aware that this applied to your work as an investigator?
Yes.
The document explains in the introduction that the rules relating to the disclosure of unused material to the defence are laid down in the Criminal Procedures and Investigations Act 1996. In light of the Human Rights Act 1998, the Attorney-General has issued new guidelines on the disclosure of unused material. The guidelines clarify the responsibilities of investigators, disclosure officers, prosecutors, and defence practitioners. Were you aware at the time you were an investigator of the Attorney-General's guidelines on disclosure?
I don't recall that specifically.
It is not referenced in this document, but were you aware of and did you ever refer to the Code for Crown Prosecutors?
I don't believe so.
Further down this page, we have the General Principles section with a section on investigators and disclosure officers. And then over the page, please, the second paragraph on this page says this: the disclosure officer is the person responsible for examining material retained during an investigation, revealing material to legal services during the investigation and any criminal proceedings resulting from it, and certifying to legal services that he has done this. Normally, the investigator and the disclosure officer will be the same person. Do you recall that being the case, that the investigator and the disclosure officer in a case were usually the same person?
Usually, there was only one investigator in the case, so yes.
You refer in your statement at paragraph 49, which we've looked at, to the disclosure forms which were completed by the investigator. Did you understand when you were an investigator completing disclosure documentation that you were acting as the disclosure officer in the case?
I don't know in those terms. I knew that they were to be completed. I guess by its reference that if I was disclosing it, I would be a disclosure officer, but I wouldn't associate myself that. I'd just be the investigator providing those documents, completing those forms.
At the time, did you understand that the disclosure officer role was a distinct role over and above your role as an investigator, which imposed on you additional and distinct duties?
I don't recall thinking that. I don't know.
In terms of your training on the Horizon system, we have looked on screen at paragraph 10 of your statement already. You deal in that paragraph with the counter training you received on the Horizon system. Do you recall the rollout of the Horizon system?
I don't know.
Were you told when you were trained on the Horizon system about any acceptance incidents or technical problems with the system arising during the rollout?
No, the training was literally just seeing the screen and using it to do little transactions.
Were you ever given any training on Horizon from the point of view of an investigator looking at Horizon data in the course of an investigation?
I don't believe there was specific training of looking at data.
Turning, please, to the supervision there was of investigators' work, could we have on screen, please, paragraph 24 of Mr. Knight's statement? That is page 11 of the statement. And you say here, the inquiry has asked me what supervision there was over criminal investigations conducted by security managers. From what I recall, between 2004 to 2007, senior managers would view case papers that were submitted for legal advice via our casework team and would add comments or give advice to the investigator. I believe this then grew into the case compliance process. This was a checklist setting out a list of actions to ensure everything had been completed correctly. In addition, during my latter years as an investigator, there was a monthly cases on hand meeting where security managers would provide updates on their cases and what actions were needed. The team leaders would discuss and come back with any recommendations. In general, I could always ask my team leader or a peer for advice on a current investigation, but my memory of how things changed over the years is not complete. Should we take it from this that at least within your team, investigators would discuss their cases with each other?
Not in a formal. There might be a mention of a case. It wasn't a discussion about this case and this was what happened. It might just be almost over a coffee type discussion.
Going back a page, please, to paragraph 23 of Mr. Knight's statement. Here you address the process for dealing with complaints about the conduct of an investigation by the security team. And you say this, I'm not sure of the process or if there was one. I would expect if a SPM had an issue with an investigation, they would raise it with their contract manager or the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, who would then follow up the issue with the senior management in the security team. This deals with sub-postmasters. Do you know what the route or process was for Crown Office employees if they had an issue with an investigation? Those individuals, of course, would not have the benefit of the membership of the NFSP.
Potentially, they would have their own union, the UCW. So it'd be basically a union, equivalent union, or potentially a line manager, which would be the same sort of structure as a network.
As far as you were aware, did Crown Office employees, through any union or representative, have any input into the policies and procedures governing the investigation of Crown Office employees?
I don't believe so.
Turning, please, to the involvement of investigators following an audit identifying an apparent shortfall. Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 29 of Mr. Knight's statement? That is page 13. You say here, in the early 2000s, an investigator was more likely to get called to an audit to enable them to approach the SPM and/or staff and arrange further inquiries. In later years, this approach diminished as auditors were instructed to write down any significant comments made by the SPM or staff. Auditors were trained in this, and the fact that they should not solicit comments as they should not get into an interview scenario. This relates to adhering to PACE, cautioning someone before they were asked, or if they were starting to admit to a crime. Were you aware of the practice of auditors taking so-called admission statements from an SPM and getting them to sign it before the arrival of an investigator?
I don't know if I was aware. I presumably there must have been, because I guess this is why this was brought in. So I don't know how to answer that, if I'm honest. I can't think of any examples, but I would assume that there must have been something. I can't remember any examples, but I would assume there must have been something for this to have been implemented.
And by this, do you mean training of auditors? What do you mean by this?
Yes. They called it a, I think they brought a form in, and it was significant comment. I forget the title of it. Note something of significant comment. And auditors, I believe, were, I don't know who they were trained. I think they were possibly trained by maybe some of the security team at team meetings or whatever. But there would be something to give them details that, as it says there, that they weren't to elicit, get into a questioning scenario. But if something was said to them, then they were to write it down and get the person to sign it as an agreed content.
At paragraph 30, you deal with the circumstances in which an investigation would take place. And you say this: in order to determine if an investigation was to take place, the information would be given to an investigator by the team leader. It is my understanding that the decision would be made if the loss reached a threshold. From memory, I think it was £5,000, or there was suspected, admitted dishonesty. If the matter was being dealt with by the contract team and there was no suspected criminality, an investigation case would not be raised. You have used the word "or" between the loss reaching a certain threshold and there being suspected or admitted dishonesty. Should the chair understand from that where there was an apparent shortfall identified at audit, provided the amount met the threshold, there would be an investigation, regardless of whether there was suspected or admitted dishonesty?
This wasn't my role to begin an investigation, but I think there was some criteria. Like I say, £5,000, I think that was, but I couldn't be certain of it. But I think there was certainly some sort of criteria involved. But again, it wasn't something that I would be doing. It was a team leader role.
Going over the page, please, to paragraph 32. About 5 lines up from the bottom of paragraph 32, you say, during the investigation of a case, the decision as to what crime, theft or false accounting, if any, had been committed, and the points to prove would have to be covered. The relevant information would be passed to the legal team, who would have the final decision on whether a case should progress to court. In terms of the culture of the investigation team, were investigations viewed as a fact-finding activity, or were they seen instead as a form of prosecutorial support?
I would have to say that the former, fact-finding, because I certainly know, from experience, I can recall interviewing somebody and realising that this person wasn't either the suspect or there was something else. So it was a start point.
Looking at the wording there about points to prove, were investigations seen as the vehicle by which points were proved?
What I mean by that is the points to prove for the offence. That would be to cover the mens rea and the actus reus, those points.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 26810? This is a copy of your CV from a point in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly the date of this document, but you've seen this before and were provided with a copy for the purposes of preparing your statement. At the top, you list a number of key achievements. And the third bullet point down says this: being the lead investigator in a number of cases where the employees have been found guilty after progressing an investigation to court. Was pressure ever placed on investigators to increase the number of successful prosecutions?
No, I don't see how it could be, but no, it certainly wasn't, as far as I was aware.
Was your performance ever assessed by reference to the number of cases where an individual had been found guilty after an investigation was progressed to court?
No, not at all.
Were bonuses or financial rewards ever linked to the number of successful prosecutions achieved, either by an individual investigator or a team of investigators?
No, I don't believe so, no.
Why was it that you considered it a professional achievement to have been the lead investigator in cases which led to guilty verdicts after prosecution?
I don't recall. Well, it's obviously my CV. I don't recall when it was done. I'm guessing at the time, ultimately, if you were investigating a case and it went through to court and it had been found guilty, you'd sort of done your job. Is the only way I can, explain it.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 67241? This is an email from Chris Card, whose role is described as law enforcement and performance manager. If we can scroll down a little, please. At the bottom there, law enforcement and performance manager for Royal Mail Security. The email itself, going back up to the top, please, is dated the 1st of November 2011, and you are one of a long list of recipients. The email attached to it, if we can scroll down, please, showing the attachment. an investigation communication 5. Could we have that communication on screen, please? The reference is POL 001 67242. This is also dated the 1st of November 2011. It says it is issued to Royal Mail Letters Security Investigations. Can you help with why it was being sent to Post Office Investigators?
So, sorry, Ms. Price. Both those documents on screen, I think, are dated 2010, not 11.
My apologies, sir. That is my misdescription. You're
Well,
entirely
that's okay.
right.
I just wanted to be sure I had the right document, that's all.
You entirely do, sir. My apologies. It's 2010.
Fine.
The issued to lists all Royal Mail Letters Security Investigations. Can you help with why it was being sent to Post Office Investigators?
Hopefully I can, yes. Obviously, up until Royal Mail and Post Office Limited split in 2012, I believe it was, up until that time, so 2010, Royal Mail would have been the lead security investigation policy holder. So they would have driven the policies and then disseminated it to everybody, as you've seen in that list.
The procedures and standards document is referred to in here, but reading the content of this communication, the recovery of criminal assets and business losses is of paramount importance to Royal Mail Group Limited. This not only increases the deterrent effect of committing acquisitive crime, it also makes complete commercial sense. Accordingly, new procedures and standards dealing with the recovery of property obtained dishonestly, compensation costs and final disposal of case exhibits have been published on the Royal Mail Security SharePoint site. All investigators should familiarise themselves with the provisions of the new P&S and bring them and the new forms into immediate effect. The procedures and standards document referred to in this investigation communication is at POL 001 04846. Could we have that on screen, please? We can see the title there, Recovery of Property Obtained Dishonestly, Compensation Costs and Final Disposal of Case Exhibits, P&S Document 9.6, November 2010. And the purpose is said to be, the aim of this document is to provide investigators in Royal Mail Letters Security with clear guidance on the procedures to be adopted to ensure that the recovery of business assets dishonestly obtained is maximised and that appropriate applications are made for compensation and cost orders at court. At paragraph 3.1, there is this: the recovery of criminal assets and business losses is of paramount importance to Royal Mail Group Limited. This not only increases the deterrent effect of committing acquisitive crime, it also makes complete commercial sense. Accordingly, investigators must ensure that whenever possible, offenders repay the value of any benefit acquired as a result of their criminality and any costs incurred by the business as a result of the investigation or prosecution. Do you recall reading this document now?
I don't, I'm afraid, no.
Do you recall there being any discussion about why it was felt necessary to stress to investigators that the recovery of criminal assets and business losses is of paramount importance to Royal Mail Group?
I don't know why it was worded like that or sent like that.
As an investigator, did you ever feel any pressure to use prosecutions as a means of recovering apparent losses from sub-postmasters and branch staff?
No. Just on that one, branch staff. Well, yeah, sorry, no. I was going to say branch staff, that if they have losses in branch, they don't cover it, but if they were prosecuted, potentially they yes. So I apologise.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 67366? This is an email from Jane Owen to you and a number of others, and it is dated the 14th of April 2010. The subject of the email is matters affecting case closures and failings, and it reads as follows. Dear all, just a reminder that you need to ensure that we are sent separate notifications for both the case closure and the failings. There have been a couple of instances whereby the failings have been included on the closure document, which has then been sent to secondary stakeholders. We need to be mindful of the audience that receives the failings, as these are to identify improvements within the business and not for sharing with the external customer. Do you recall the issue being raised in this email?
I don't, if I'm honest. No.
Why would it have been a problem for secondary stakeholders to have been aware of failings identified in the course of an investigation?
The way I read that, and I presumably, if I read it back then, would be because obviously the post office conducts transactions on behalf of numerous other stakeholders. So if there was a failure in a product or a transaction of a product of something of that nature, that's what I'm guessing what is being referred to.
Was this reflective of a wider culture within the post office to conceal failings from those outside of the business?
I don't know.
Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 33 of Mr. Knight's statement to the inquiry? That is page 14. At paragraph 33, you say this: when I received a case for investigation, I would start by understanding the background, including the audit result and why the audit had taken place. Usually the branch was targeted for audit as the branch had come to the attention of the branch analysis team, BAT, due to anomalies or concerns. For example, this may be because the branch had not returned cash when asked to do so, or had completed suspicious transactions such as a large number of reversals or excess spoiled postage. I would also obtain the last 3 months of credence data to view the updated data in relation to concerns raised by BAT. If necessary, further archive data may have been needed via the ARQ process. You say here that you would obtain the last 3 months of credence data to view data relating to concerns by the branch analysis team. First of all, what was the branch analysis team and where did it sit within the structure of the business?
I think it sat in the FSC, the Financial Service Centre, initially.
In cases where the audit had taken place in the absence of any concerns being raised by the BAT, would you obtain the last 3 months of credence data?
Yes.
So you did that in all cases?
Yes.
Before credence data was available, what did you rely upon? I don't know. I don't know. Can you recall there being Horizon printouts obtained by the auditor, printed from the counter in a branch?
I do recall printouts. There was various documentation that is produced by a branch at various points in a day, in a month, or whatever.
In general terms, did you consider that credence data was sufficient to evidence a loss to the business?
I don't know whether it would evidence a loss. It would just be sort of transactional data. As I said there, if there was something specific you were looking for, it was transactional data. Nothing sort of stood out per se.
Where you had a report from an auditor saying what had been found in terms of cash and stock in a branch, and that was being compared to credence data about what the Horizon system said should be in branch. In that context, did you consider that the comparison between those two things was sufficient to evidence a loss to the business?
The audit would be the result, so they would do their balance of what the Horizon system in branch said should be there, and they would count it, and if it was there or wasn't there. If it wasn't there, obviously there was a loss. The credence data was just the data of all the transactions along the way. And obviously there was other data and the back office data for transfers and logging on and logging off, such like. But that was the data. So it wasn't used to verify the audit, if that makes sense.
So from your perspective, the audit report produced from the auditor, was that the evidence that you considered proved a loss to the business?
Yes.
What guidance was given to investigators to assist them in obtaining Horizon data from Fujitsu?
I don't know about you could request it from the security team, the archive data. So anything over 3 months, obviously, you could request it from, or they would request it on your behalf from Fujitsu.
You've referred to anything over 3 months. Was that the only reason you would seek ARQ data from Fujitsu if you wanted to go further back in time?
That was, yeah, I guess so, yes.
Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 57 of Mr. Knight's statement? That is page 22, please. You say in the first sentence here, when required, credence data would more than likely be used, as that showed exactly the same information as ARQ data. Who told you that that was the case?
I don't know if anybody told me that was the case. I think it was because it was transactional data, if that.
Were you aware when you were an investigator that the audit trail data held by Fujitsu contained more information than in the standard ARQ response?
Sorry, say that again.
Were you aware that there was additional data held by Fujitsu which contained more information than you would find in a standard ARQ response to a request?
I don't know. I can't recall.
Were you ever made aware that an enhanced interrogation of the audit trail could show when a transaction or event had been performed by the system?
There was transactional data and then event data, if that makes. So one was the transaction, one was sort of the front end, and the other one was the back office. That's what I understand.
Were you aware that others could perform enhanced interrogation of audit data and find more information, particularly when a transaction or event had been performed by the system?
I don't know if I was aware of that.
Who was responsible for deciding whether to retrieve Horizon data from Fujitsu?
I'd say the investigator.
Were there ever circumstances in which you would request more detailed audit data from Fujitsu before you interviewed a sub-postmaster or branch staff member?
I don't know. I don't recall.
Or do you recall ever doing that?
I don't know. I don't recall.
Was this step ever taken before a decision was made to prosecute?
I don't know.
Was this step ever taken before a not guilty plea was entered, to your recollection?
I don't recall.
Were you aware at the time that there was a quota placed on audit request queries made of Fujitsu?
I don't know. I'm aware now because the team I'm in, we manage that process. So I'm aware now. I don't know if I was aware then. I think I probably was. I think there was made mention of quotas, but I don't think I could pinpoint what it was at the time, but I think I was aware.
Was this something which you were ever conscious of when deciding whether to seek further data from Fujitsu?
No, I don't believe so.
You say at paragraph 38 of your statement to the inquiry that MBSC call logs were requested to understand if the branch had been reporting issues that related to the inquiry. Would you request MBSC call logs in all apparent shortfall cases you dealt with?
Possibly not.
In what circumstances would you?
I don't know. If somebody had been querying something, if they thought they'd been queried it, or just to check, I don't recall.
In what circumstances would you request Horizon helpline call logs in addition to the MBSC call logs?
I think that was probably. I can't recall doing it. Probably latterly. I would suggest. I can't think of sort of early when I joined Pol.
You say latterly. Why latterly?
I think there was just because that was. I think that was sort of brought in towards. I want to say latterly, probably 2010-ish, 2020, around that way. I think.
Turning please to the role of the security team in relation to prosecution decisions. Could we have on screen please paragraph 40 of Mr. Knight's statement to the inquiry, which is page 16. You say here, once the investigator had concluded the investigation or got to a point where legal advice was needed, the case file would be passed to the legal team who would decide if a case was to be taken to court. The designated authority manager, DAM, a senior member of the security team, would give the final consent to continue to prosecution. Was the designated authority manager the same role as the designated prosecution authority?
Yes, I've probably called it the wrong name, but yes.
Did an investigator conducting the relevant investigation have any input into the decision as to whether someone should be prosecuted?
No.
Did it ever strike you as being inappropriate that a senior security manager from the security team, which was responsible for conducting initial investigations, was the one to give the final consent to continue to prosecution?
I never thought about it. It was just a process.
Could we have, please, paragraph 56 of Mr. Knight's statement on the screen, please? It's page 9. It's not page 9, my apologies. It's page 22. At paragraph 56, you say this: during my time in the security team before the GLO, I do not recall an SPM assistant or Crown Office employee attributing a shortfall to problems with Horizon. Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 000-66743? This is a transcript of the interview with Peter Holmes on the 19th of September 2008, for which you were a second officer, and this is one of the cases you address in your statement. You were provided with the record of tape-recorded interview for the purposes of providing your statement, and you've more recently been provided with this transcript of the tape. Have you had a chance to read through it?
I believe I have, yes. Yeah.
It is just a full transcript as opposed to the summary and partial transcription we find in a record of tape-recorded interview.
Right.
Could we go, please, to page 7? About halfway down the page, please. Robert Daly asks, and your experience with Horizon, how would you rate it? And Mr. Holmes says, very slow, it's okay, it's an auditor's tool. That particular one we had problems with because it was connected to a telephone line that also had the fax machine connected to it. Robert Daly says, that's the ones that Jesmond. Mr. Holmes says, at Jesmond, the branch, and we had BT engineers in looking at the line, we had Horizon engineers in looking at the line, and eventually we had to take the fax machine out, throw it away, and get a new one in, provided by Mr. Canner, and now it seemed to work. But there was a time when, what, says Mr. Daly, it wasn't so slow, it wasn't so good, people using cards just weren't getting through. Robert Daly says, what period was that? Peter Holmes, I suppose 9 months ago for 3 months. Mr. Daly, so we're talking about the beginning of this year, December. I'm not very good with times, but yes, possibly. Mr. Holmes at this point in the interview was raising some technical problems with the functioning of the system here, wasn't he?
It seems that way.
Could we go, please, to page 27 of this document? And this is Robert Daly again asking the questions. About 2/3 of the way down the page, where he says, yeah, so what can you tell me about the shortage then? And Mr. Holmes says, I have absolutely no idea, absolutely no idea, unless it's the Horizon that's let us down. I mean, there's nobody in there storing 46,000. I haven't got it. It's not in my bank account. I spent too many years in the police force seeing things go wrong to start stealing money from anybody. I really do not know. Okay, says Robert Daly, why is there 2 cash declarations then? There was one in because I knew we were showing short and I covered it up. Mr. Daly covered up what? Peter Holmes, the fact we were short in cash. By how much? I can't remember. So Mr. Holmes here was offering as a possible explanation the shortage being caused by the computer system letting them down, wasn't he?
Yes, from reading that, on top of what he was saying, it was slow and not very functional.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 20627? This is a suspect offender report sent by you to the fraud team and to Graham Ward on the 13th of February 2009, relating to the investigation of Scott Darlington. Next to the brief summary of facts of the case, there is this: audit shortage 40k, sub-postmaster told auditors immediately that there would be a shortage. He said he was expecting TCs, that's transaction corrections, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then under this, next to brief summary of admissions denials made at interview, admitted false accounting since first shortage in September-October trading period, denied stealing, adamant that it would be errors and TCs would come to light. So this sub-postmaster was saying that the shortage was caused by errors and he expected transaction corrections to come to light. Is that a fair summary of what this document is saying? Would you not categorise this as a sub-postmaster attributing a shortfall to the Horizon system?
No, I wouldn't. Not that. Errors to me and TCs were errors, something that had occurred in the branch by somebody making a mistake or an error, not a technical Horizon deficiency.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 20600? This is a memo from Jarnail Singh. If we can scroll down, please, to the second page. Apologies, down again. See at the bottom, it's from Jarnail Singh, Senior Lawyer, Criminal Law Division. And going back to the first page at the top, please. This is sent to Post Office Security and copied to you and Graham Ward, as well as the press office. And it is dated the 2nd of March 2010. Mr. Singh is reporting back on the outcome of the Darlington case, and he says this: the above-named defendant, having pleaded guilty to all 5 counts of false accounting at Chester Crown Court on the 1st of February 2010, he attended Chester Crown Court for sentence on the 23rd of February. The prosecution was conducted by Deborah White, and the defendant was also represented, and the case was heard by His Honour Judge Dalton. On hearing the facts of the case, His Honour Judge Dalton inquired whether there was an actual loss or whether the missing funds were as a result of a glitch in Royal Mail systems. Counsel for the defence maintained that he had pleaded on the basis that although there was a shortfall, Mr. Darlington was not responsible for it and had merely covered it up. Prosecution counsel requested a Newton hearing to address the issue. However, having considered the request, His Honour Judge refused the adjournment, that the expense of the delay of further investigation was unjustifiable, and that he proposed to proceed on the basis most favourable for the defendant. As a result, Mr. Darlington was sentenced on the basis that no money was missing, and His Honour Judge sentenced as follows. And then further down that page, the sentence is set out. Do you recall being made aware that the judge had queried in this case whether there was an actual loss or whether instead there was a glitch in the Royal Mail systems.
I believe I was, but I think I was actually in the, not in the court, but in the court building, I think at the time. But I don't remember the specifics like that, obviously, into that, but yes.
Did this cause you any concern at the time?
I don't think I sort of understood it as such. I think it was just something that was said there. I don't know what glitch or however it meant. Obviously, you know, hindsight and where we are now looking back, but at the time, I wasn't thinking of Horizon issues.
Can you recall if there was any discussion within the security team or with the criminal law team following this judicial comment?
I don't believe I was. If there was, I don't think I was party to it. I don't recall.
Can you recall anyone suggesting there should be a review of what had happened in this case?
No, I don't.
Were you ever trained or given instruction by the criminal law team or anyone else at the post office on proof of loss when relying on Horizon data?
I would say not. As I said previously, I think the loss was derived from an audit.
Can you recall there being any discussion following this case of what would be required to prove loss when Horizon data was being relied upon?
I don't recall that.
Did the judicial comment in this case cause you to question your approach to proof of loss in any future cases?
I would say no, because the process, as I say, it was always the audit.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 000-21244? This is the transcript of the second tape from an interview which you conducted with Alison Hall on the 28th of September 2010, some 6 months after the outcome in the Darlington case had been communicated via that correspondence we've just looked at. Mm-hmm. Again, you were provided with the record of tape-recorded interview for the purposes of preparing your statement, and have more recently been provided with this transcript of the tapes. Again, have you had a chance to look through it?
I've had a look through, yes.
Could we go, please, to page 4 of this transcript? About 2/3 of the way down the page, you say this. Right, so you're adamant that the 14,000 is nothing that you've done criminally, fraudulently, however you want to put it. Alison Hall says, I have not taken a penny out of that post office criminally. I wouldn't dare. You say it's something to do with some sort of discrepancy. Mrs. Hall says, I think it's to do with discrepancy with the lottery, and I'm hoping that we can come to the bottom of this. You say, right. Mrs. Hall says, I will pay any money back what's owed to the Post Office Limited. I'm not a thief. I will pay anything back. But I just want all this to be looked at in detail. And because Horizon Systems, not 100%, if I've got all the details here, I'd like that to be taken into account, please. And you say, right, and that's fine. I understand that. And like I said, I don't want to harp on the subject. Yes, you've given me some details. Why did you not want to harp on the subject of the problems with Horizon being reported by Mrs. Hall here?
I don't think I was relating to the Horizon problem. I think I was just relating to that. We've been speaking about the lottery, about the lottery. I don't say it would have been the Horizon system. I don't think there was a discussion much about that.
That comment from you about not wanting to harp on the subject is not included in the record of tape-recorded interview that we've got. Do you know why that is?
I don't know. I would suggest when I was doing, presumably I did the summary, that wasn't a significant comment or anything.
Mrs. Hall was telling you that the Horizon system was not 100% and asking for that to be taken into account. Do you accept that Mrs. Hall was directly raising Horizon integrity issues in her interview?
Looking at it now, looking back, but at the time, I don't think I took that as great substance. It just seemed there because Horizon 100%. Lots of computers, you might say, like one previously, if it's slow or whatever it might be, it's what the context is of why is it not 100%.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 000-91063? This is the report for the criminal law team which you produced relating to Mrs. Hall's case after interviewing her. And if we go, please, to the last page of that document. Maybe the penultimate page. Forgive me if we go back 2 pages. And again. And again. And to the bottom of that page, please. And that's the last page of that document with your name and the date of the report. That's the 18th of October 2010.
Yes.
Have you had a chance to read through this document recently?
Yes.
In this report, you recounted the parts of the interview. If we can go, please, to page 2. Without going through line by line, you set out the parts of the interview with Mrs. Hall where she raised issues relating to the lottery scratch cards. But having looked through this a number of times, I can't find any reference to Mrs. Hall's request that the matter be looked at in detail because Horizon was not 100%. Do you agree that that isn't in your report?
Yes.
Why didn't you include that in your report?
I guess I didn't take it as a comment. She was talking about scratch cards and lottery, and that's what I was sort of focused on.
By the time you completed this report, you were aware of at least 2 cases of sub-postmasters raising issues to do with Horizon, Mr. Holmes's case that we've looked at, and Mr. Darlington's case. You were also aware of the judge's comments in the Darlington case. You were aware at the time, weren't you, that advice given by the criminal law team on charging and prosecution decisions was based on the information contained in an investigator's report to them? Were you aware of that?
Yes.
It was this document which the criminal law team considered when assessing whether any further investigation was needed as well, wasn't it?
I presume so, yes.
Would you accept, therefore, that it was important for your report fully to reflect any and all reasonable lines of inquiry raised by Mrs. Hall in interview?
I would concede that view in this and in light of where we are now. But back then, again, as I said, that comment about not 100%, I wouldn't have taken that as something that was fundamentally wrong with the system. And the other bits and pieces you said about the glitch, I don't recall ever being given the full explanation of, you know, what glitches and whatever there was.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 000555783? This is an email from Rob Wilson to Diane Chan, Prosecution Counsel, copied to you. It is dated the 17th of November 2010, and it relates to Mrs. Henderson's case. And the email reads as follows. Diane, have received a defence statement today, despite the telephone conversation yesterday. A hard copy has been put in the post today. At point 2, the defence allege that any discrepancy was as a result of the Horizon system. There is also a challenge to the initial missing figure of £18,000, which was reduced according to the defence statement in a matter of minutes. The statement also maintains that further investigation by the auditor would have discovered the whereabouts of the alleged missing sum. Mrs. Henderson had by this point made it part of her pleaded case that any discrepancy was as a result of the Horizon system, hadn't she?
I believe the defence statement mentioned that. Not during the interview. I think it was a defence statement. I believe. I might be corrected on that, but
indeed, this email is telling you that a defence statement received that day contained an allegation that the discrepancy was as a result of the Horizon system. And you were being told about this, weren't you, in this email from Mr. Wilson?
yes.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 69422? This is an email from Jane Owen to you and others. It is dated the 18th of January 2011. The subject line is urgent update required. And Ms. Owen's email reads as follows. Dear all, can I please ask for your help urgently? I have been asked to provide an update on the attached cases where Horizon integrity has come into question and need the information by tomorrow. I have checked against the spreadsheet but am unable to cover off the gaps, which are namely court case details, result, accused defence, exactly. Could you either add into the spreadsheet using bright pink font, as I have done in the recoveries column, or just pop updates on an email and I will collate. Many thanks. Ms. Owen attached a spreadsheet. Could we have that on screen, please? The reference is POL 001 69423. And just scrolling through this spreadsheet, if we're able to. We can see a number of cases listed. And in the fourth column from the 4 columns in, column D, we see the post office branch being listed with some information relating to each of those cases, which are said to be ones where Horizon integrity has come into question, as Miss Owen puts it. On my count, this spreadsheet lists 20 cases. Mr. Darlington's case is one of these. Do you accept that by January 2011, when Miss Owen sent this email, you were aware that there were at least 20 cases where Horizon integrity had come into question?
Yes, I would have to say that, viewing this, but I don't know at the time if that had comprehended that.
Well, the email is pretty straightforward in its terms, Mr. Knight.
Yes, sir. I understand what the email and this sheet. I don't know. I've got no.
I mean,
response for it.
would I be fair if I concluded that if you had read that email, you must have understood that the attachment contained 20 cases where Horizon integrity issues had been raised?
Yes, I would say that's a reasonable assumption.
Thanks.
So I wonder if that might be an appropriate moment for the morning break.
Yeah.
If we could take 15 minutes, please.
Right, so, well, let's say 20 to 12, is it?
20 to 12, sir. Thank you. Hello, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Knight, in light of the answers that you gave before the break, I'd like to go to one further document from 2010. And the reference is POL 00325-402. This top email is from you to Steve Bradshaw, dated the 4th of February 2010, forwarding the email below, which is the subject Horizon Challenges. And if we can go, please, to the email below. This is you to Andy Hayward, Ian Murphy, Andrew Daly, and Jason Collins. Horizon Challenges, you say, gentlemen, further to my remark in my previous email, regards CK. And you seem to be providing links there underneath to various articles and resources, including Computer Weekly, The Grocer, BBC, Talking Retail. And just scrolling down, please. And that's the bottom of the email. But we've got there the title, Horizon Challenges, of that email. Did you understand those Horizon challenges to be challenges to the integrity of the Horizon system when you sent that email?
I don't recall, obviously, what the content of each one of those articles was, but I knew that there was a growing media, as those, you know, a talking point, a topic or whatever. But again, in comparison with what the business was saying, I think that was probably my point, that we were told that everything is fine, that we weren't told anything different, but there was this undercurrent.
But in terms of what you say in your statement, paragraph 56, that you do not recall an SPM assistant or Crown Office employee attributing a shortfall to problems with Horizon. Is that not exactly what this is? An email about sub-postmasters attributing shortfalls to Horizon?
It is, again, from where we are today, looking back. But again, at the time, my viewpoint would have been one of what the business was saying, and any sort of challenges, you know, to Horizon that had been upheld.
So is paragraph 56 of your statement wrong in that case?
I don't know. I don't know if it's wrong. I don't know how I'm interpreting this information. I'm going by what I sort of believed at the time, and what the message was. The overarching message, shall I say, from the business, that everything was okay.
We'll come on in due course to the business message.
Oh, sorry.
But could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 67369? This is an email from Graham Ward to a list of recipients, including you. It is dated the 14th of April 2011. And the subject line is Credence versus Fujitsu. And Mr. Ward says this in his email: all, if anyone has any evidence of disparities between Fujitsu and Credence transaction data, please get in touch, e.g. timing issues, session numbers not matching for postage label transactions, etc. Tar Muchley. What was your understanding of why this inquiry was being made of you?
I don't honestly recall the email or the email, the question. Reading it there, I don't know, just discrepancies between the Fujitsu and the Credence data. So,
on its face, it suggests there was an issue being investigated by Mr. Ward of a disparity between the transaction data shown on Credence and the data held by Fujitsu, doesn't it?
yes, I guess it does from the on the face of it. Yes.
And that would be potentially very significant, would it not, where investigators like you understood the Credence data to show exactly the same information as ARQ data?
Yes.
Did this concern you at all at the time, or can you simply not remember?
I don't recall, I'm afraid.
Looking at it now, would it have concerned you at the time?
With hindsight and everything that's gone on subsequently, I think it would have made me think yes.
This shouldn't it, have led you to question the reliability of the Credence data you were relying on to prove loss, where you hadn't requested further data from Fujitsu?
Yes, looking at this in its in the sentence, yes. What those disparities were, it's given some examples of timing issues, session numbers not matching. I don't know if they would have affected the reliability of the data. I don't know.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 07683? This is a report to Legal Services which was produced by Stephen Bradshaw on the 18th of April 2011, 4 days after Mr. Ward's email about Credence data versus Fujitsu data. It relates to a case where you sat in on an interview as a second officer. Could we have page 3 of this report, please? About halfway down the page is a heading covering the interview with Ms. Threlfall. And underneath, Mr. Bradshaw says this: at 12:13 a.m. I interviewed Mrs. Rita Catherine Threlfall at the Liverpool North Delivery Office. Present throughout the interview was Mr. Christopher Knight, fraud investigator. Then 2 paragraphs down, Mr. Bradshaw explains that a pre-prepared statement was read out in the interview by the legal representative in attendance. And the content of that statement is then set out towards the bottom of that page and over to the next page. And going over to the next page, please. The 3rd paragraph down. She then explained the type of transactions performed when she took over the branch, the contact she had with Post Office Limited, and that she used to perform a weekly balance and that mistakes could readily be found. And then going down 4 paragraphs, please, the paragraph starting, she then said that the system upgrades started to be implemented and that she did not know how these upgrades affected the balances. She told to leave the computer switched on. She said that when there were discrepancies, it was difficult to get a result from the transaction log, and she received a printed message stating no transaction found. She then said that monies were placed to make good the supposed cash shortages due to discrepancies becoming increasingly difficult to uncover. She said that on the balance snapshot, the figures show an amount defined as cash, and this figure is meant to equal the declared cash, and that for some considerable time these figures at her office differed greatly. She sets out a number of other issues below. And then over the page, please, the 2nd paragraph. She denied stealing any post office monies or false accounted, and that she had received no assistance from Post Office Limited. If these losses had happened at her office, then they must be happening at many more offices. This is another example, is it not, of a sub-postmaster in an interview you were present at, attributing shortfalls to the Horizon system?
Yes, it is.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 00323734? This is an email chain containing emails sent between you and Neil Thornycroft on the 24th of May 2011, a little over a month after Mr. Ward's email about Credence data versus Fujitsu data. Can you explain, please, who Mr. Thornycroft was?
He worked in the Financial Service Centre on the lottery team.
The emails relate to Mrs. Hall's case. And starting, please, towards the bottom of the page, you email Mr. Thornycroft, attaching a statement you put together for him from previous notes about the case. Just pausing there, was it usual for you to prepare draft witness statements for court for witnesses?
It would be to go through it, because they obviously member of staff wouldn't know how to commit a witness statement, so it would go through, and obviously he would check that everything is correct that has been put in it.
Mr. Thornycroft's email reply is in the middle of the page, and he says this: "Hi Chris, made a few amendments. I'm no longer working as the lottery team manager. I've gone back to my previous PO role. I hope this won't go to court. The perceived lottery discrepancy was a bit of a phantom." Then your response to Mr. Thornycroft is at the top. And you say this: "Neil, thanks. I hope it won't go to court either. I have heard she is blaming Horizon now," with 4 exclamation marks. There is no way of characterising Mrs. Hall's position in this case other than she was attributing shortfalls to the Horizon system, is there?
It was around the lottery. She was saying it was lottery, and I tried to get to the bottom of that, and it didn't seem it was lottery.
But you're saying here is a separate issue, aren't you?
Oh.
I have heard she is blaming Horizon now.
Yes.
And you were fully aware of that position at the time because it's said in terms in this email, weren't you?
Is what, sorry?
You were fully aware that she was attributing shortfalls to the Horizon system because you have said in terms that that is the case in this email.
I think I must have heard it from legal services.
In Mrs. Hall's case, you made some inquiries of those responsible for the lottery, and we've seen the interaction here with Mr. Thornycroft. But did you make any inquiries of Fujitsu or anyone else within Post Office to explore Mrs. Hall's assertion that a Horizon was not 100%?
I believe I asked, I got call logs if she'd reported any lottery issues. I don't think there was any lottery calls to the helpline.
So what you were
no.
looking for was lottery calls?
Yes, I was focused on the lottery.
Is it the case that when you made your statement and you say you don't recall cases where people were attributing shortfalls to Horizon, is the reason that you didn't recall that you didn't treat the concerns raised as being significant?
That's probably a good explanation. I think it was there was I had no background on what the claims were, and obviously, and I know you said you're going to get onto it, but obviously what the business was saying. So that was probably my thoughts on it.
Would you accept now that you were unduly dismissive of the concerns which were being raised about the integrity of the Horizon system?
Probably looking at it now, on the information I had then, I was unaware, I would suggest, with all the other information, as we said, about the business and such like. So, yeah, in hindsight.
Do you accept that at least in Mrs. Hall's case, by not exploring concerns about Horizon, you failed to pursue a reasonable line of inquiry?
Again, I say I was going with the lottery, so in essence, in view of that, I would have to concede to that, I suggest.
Could we have on screen, please, page 40 of Mr. Knight's statement, paragraph 116. In the first sentence at 116, you say this: I do not recall being aware of any robust challenges to Horizon other than the GLA. What do you mean by robust challenges to Horizon?
Robust challenge where something had been shown as Horizon was had failed, or something had been thrown out, completely by Horizon, or some message or something that had come through. Obviously, the GLO was the big piece. So I think I was basing it on that type of that level of detailed information.
But in the context of criminal prosecutions, isn't that the wrong way round? It is for the prosecution to prove the guilt of someone, not for them to prove their innocence.
Yes.
You go on, I dealt with a number of people who admitted their dishonesty, and so the integrity of Horizon was not at the forefront of my mind. The business message was consistent that Horizon was robust, so there was never any doubt in my mind. Who was the business message that Horizon was robust coming from?
It was obviously within our security team, John Scott, and it was it just seemed to be the business message. I think there was other people, other senior managers, you know, I can't recall them exactly, but it was an overarching message, you know, that the system was fine, and this, you know, these, as I say, these claims or whatever were not an issue. It just that seemed to be that was the message.
You've mentioned John Scott. Was the message coming from outside of the security team as well?
I think it was. I think it was. I can't recall who it was, but I think it was other senior, you know, managers who probably had an awareness of what our team did and the business.
Can you recall what level within the business you're talking about?
I think it would have been more senior people. You know, it would have been senior. I guess on a level with Mr. Scott, or potentially more higher. I can't recall exactly, but it just seemed to be that was the message.
Did you ever question the party line, given the mounting number of cases which you were aware of, where Horizon integrity was being raised?
No, is the answer to that.
Do you think you should have?
I think that email you showed where I sent the 4 links, I think that was my point of seeing these things and being, you know, passing it on. But as for challenging the business ethos, I don't know how I would have done that, and I wouldn't have done that, and I didn't, obviously.
Regardless of what the business message was, you were under a duty as an investigator to pursue reasonable lines of inquiry, weren't you?
Yes.
And what was a reasonable line of inquiry was your call, wasn't it? Nobody else's.
Yes.
So would you accept that reassurance from the business about Horizon could not have justified a decision not to pursue an otherwise reasonable line of inquiry?
Yes.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 001 41218? This is an email from Andrew Daly, dated the 5th of July 2010, forwarding to you and others an email from Jane Owen, below, dated the 2nd of July 2010, and there are a number of other emails beneath hers. The subject is duplication of transaction records in ARQ returns. And this is a document you comment on at paragraph 61 of your statement to the inquiry. Ms. Owen's email reads as follows, scrolling down a little, please. Dear both, the original recipients being Jason Collins and Andrew Daly, please see email below from Penny Thomas. Mark, Alan Simpson and myself have had a conference call today to look at potential problems that this is likely to cause. Firstly, the suggested workaround will need to be put to our legal team, and until that has been agreed, any further ARQ requests, including those which have already been submitted, will be suspended. There are 2 cases currently with the court, West Byfleet and Porters Avenue, and I will speak to Lisa and John about these, as we need to know what in the way of ARQs and the corresponding statements have been presented to court. In addition, I have identified the following offices from the casework spreadsheet as ones that potentially could have already had information presented to the court. Could you please confirm whether or not this is the case, and also whether there are any I have missed, as Fujitsu will need to take corrective action? On the face of things, this email is expressing concern, is it not, that inaccurate data may have been presented to the court in support of prosecutions?
Yes, it is ARQ. Yeah.
was it your understanding, based on what you say in your statement, that the issue affected the integrity of ARQ data provided by Fujitsu?
That's what I put in my statement. I don't recall this, but that's, I think, how I understood it. That when it was, however, it was taken off the main system, that something had happened with the duplication.
Did this concern you, or if you can't recall, would it have concerned you at the time that incorrect data might have been provided to the court in support of prosecutions brought by the Post Office?
Anything that's not correct, yeah.
In circumstances where an increasing number of sub-postmasters were raising concerns about the integrity of the Horizon system, did it occur to you, looking at this, that they might be right, that there might be a problem not just with the ARQ data produced to support prosecutions, but with the integrity of the Horizon data itself?
Probably not. Again, I'm going back to thinking back then, not from hindsight. And this was an ARQ, potentially an ARQ issue, but the Horizon data was its integrity was intact. I think that was the thought.
I'd like to go back, please, to your involvement in the investigation and prosecution of Alison Henderson. We touched on an email about that case earlier. Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 79 of Mr. Knight's statement to the inquiry? It's page 29. And at paragraph 79, you say this: in order to progress the investigation, the next step was to interview Ms. Henderson. The timing of the interview is down to the lead investigator. It was standard procedure to have a second officer at all interviews. In this case, it was my colleague, Mr. Paul Whittaker. I can see that in Ms. Henderson's witness statement, she states, I was allowed to bring my Federation rep, but he was not allowed to speak during the interview. As part of PO rules, a person being interviewed can have someone from the union present. This is only to act as an observer. If they are told at the start of the interview of their role, they may be permitted to speak if it helps facilitate the interview. Can you help with the circumstances in which it might facilitate the interview if a union representative was allowed to speak?
I've had an occasion trying to explain if I'm trying to talk about a transaction or something like that, and maybe I'm not explaining it how the postmaster would understand it, and maybe if the Federation rep can see past my confusion or whatever, is to just facilitate it.
You go on at paragraph 80 to say this: disclosure would only be made to a solicitor, not the suspect, so that the solicitor could advise their client. Do you mean by this that pre-interview disclosure would only be provided if someone was represented by a solicitor?
Yes, we would only give the disclosure to a solicitor.
Who was it who instructed or trained you to the effect that pre-interview disclosure should only be made if someone was legally represented?
I believe that's how I understood it to be. Disclosure for the solicitor.
What was the reasoning behind this?
Just so they could advise their client.
Forgive me, what was the reason for not providing it if there wasn't a solicitor?
Probably, mainly probably because we're talking about something that the person would already know. I guess I don't know.
Mrs. Henderson's position in interview was that she did not know what the cause of the apparent shortfall was, and that it was a complete shock to her when the shortage was found on audit. She says, in effect, she was saying the cause of the apparent shortfall was unexplained. Would you agree with that, having had the
Yes,
opportunity
yeah,
to read
yeah.
the documents?
Yeah.
The interview took place on the 11th of March 2010. That was 9 days after Jarnail Singh had reported to you and others the result of the Darlington case with the judicial comment we looked at. Mrs. Henderson was someone apparently completely in the dark about the reasons for a shortfall. Did it occur to you at the time, with what you knew by that point, that the Horizon data you were relying on might be wrong?
No, it didn't.
Did you consider that you were under any obligation to get to the bottom of the shortfall?
Yes, you're always looking to understand what it was.
You've had an opportunity to look at the record of interview in Mrs. Henderson's case. Your questions in interview tend to suggest you were convinced that Mrs. Henderson was guilty of theft. By way of example, you told her it was difficult to believe she did not know what happened to the money. Is that the case, that you were convinced she was guilty of theft?
I believe she well, yeah, a theft. I believe she knew something that what she wasn't telling me, but.
Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 75 of Mr. Knight's statement? It's page 28. You say here, in this case, I was what was known as the first officer or lead investigator. Various data would have been obtained from Credence, which gives the same data as ARQ, but is immediately accessible to download rather than having to request from Fujitsu. Credence data covers the 3-month period prior to the current date. It's also easier to read than the ARQ data, as the item long name is shown rather than just an item ID. From Credence, you can obtain transactional data and event data, back office items. So the data you obtained in this case was Credence data, not ARQ data, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 000-47155? This is a memo from Rob Wilson. If we can go to the bottom of that, please, and over the page. So we see Rob Wilson, Head of Criminal Law. And going back to the top of the first page, please. It's dated the 25th of March 2010. And Mr. Wilson's Mr. Wilson's memo, which is sent to the security team and copied to you, reads as follows. I understand from the papers that an audit discovered a shortage of just in excess of £11,900 at a sub-post office that was only open on a limited basis. I also understand from the papers that whilst the suspect would maintain that she was unaware of the loss, the suspicion is that when she completed the branch trading statement on the 6th of January 2010, she would have been aware of the loss. Could you explain to me why she would have been aware of the loss? I note there is reference to a table in Appendix B, which leads to the suspicion that she knew of the loss. I am not able to understand why it shows that she would have been aware that the accounts were short on that occasion. Presumably, we would be able to interrogate Horizon and establish a full accounting pattern for the sub-office to show all transactions that were conducted and therefore how much money was paid out, how much was received in remittances, and therefore how much should have been present in the account. Accordingly, I would like to understand how it is that we can pinpoint where this loss occurred. You may think it sensible at this stage, bearing in mind it is most unlikely that she will plead guilty, that we start to put together full witness statement and exhibit bundles. You replied to Mr. Wilson on the 20th of April 2010. Could we have this reply on screen, please? It's POL 000445501. And you say here, I believe that Mrs. Henderson would have been aware of the shortage on the 6th of January 2010 when she completed the branch trading statement, as a discrepancy was shown in the Horizon events log. I have spoken to a manager at a Crown office and she couldn't understand why such a large figure had been entered. She confirmed that the cash figures would have been entered manually and then the system produces the discrepancy positive or negative entry. It would appear very strange that an error was £20 different to the audit shortage discovered 4 weeks later. Circumstantial, possibly, but Mrs. Henderson hasn't been able to offer an explanation. Then 2 paragraphs down, you say this. If Mrs. Henderson is to be believed, and the BT was correct on the 6th of January 2010, she lost nearly 12k in 5 weeks to the 10th of February 2010. Then factor in she is open 2 full days and 2 half days, so in essence 3 full days. The 12k loss that has occurred in 15 days. The largest transaction in that period was a post office card account withdrawal for £400. And just above that, we can see your sentence here. I hope you feel we can continue with charges of theft and false accounting. Was it usual for you to express hope that the criminal law team would advise in favour of charges?
I think that's probably badly written on my part for how it comes across. I think it was more of a that I've answered your questions and we can progress. It wasn't anything malicious or anything of that nature.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 000471159? This is the criminal law team's advice dated the 21st of May 2010 from Rob Wilson. He says this in the first 2 paragraphs. In my opinion, the evidence is sufficient to afford a realistic prospect of conviction of the above named on a charge of theft as set out on the attached schedule. I have not drafted a commencement date in the theft as I am not clear when we are saying the losses started. Can you fill in such a date and explain to me your rationale for relying on this particular date? Bearing in mind Mrs. Henderson's explanation in relation to the loss, it does not seem appropriate to consider false accounting charges. It would be helpful if we could obtain some evidence to refute the possibility that the money she alleges must have gone missing was not, in fact, in the account during the last accounting period prior to the audit. He requests some further evidence in this memo. Going over the page, please. And at 4, he says, reference is also made in the report at page 27 to the initial entry for 6,967.28. The paragraph goes on to explain that the other cash figure of 11,970.69 was probably a discrepancy shown which has been re-input to achieve a zero balance. Could this theory also be explained in the form of a witness statement producing all documents that establish the theory? In other words, the prosecution really need to try and prove that the thefts in this case took place over a period of time, in circumstances where the defendant must be the thief, as she is the only person who has access to the cash at the post office. A further memo was sent by Mr. Wilson on the 19th of August 2010. Could we have that on screen, please? It's POL 000555189. This is sent direct to you, and it reads as follows. The above named entered a not guilty plea in relation to the current charge. The charge has been amended to read between 1st of January 1997 and 10th of February 2010. Clearly, this cannot be the full period of the fraud, and no doubt some indication as to the beginning date will be given in due course. The prosecution are now required to prepare the witness statement and exhibit bundles and serve disclosure evidence. I'd be grateful if the statements as outlined in my advice of the 21st of May could be obtained. In addition to those statements, it would be helpful to understand why the audit took place on the 10th of February. I am sure that this case will be one of those cases where the Horizon evidence will be challenged, and in due course I expect we will need to obtain expert evidence from Mr. Jenkins of Fujitsu. So Mr. Wilson was flagging that this may be a case where Horizon evidence was challenged, wasn't he?
Yes.
And at this stage, there was still some doubt, wasn't there, as to the date period in relation to the alleged theft or fraud?
Yes.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 000555314? This is a memo dated the 29th of September 2010 to you, again from Rob Wilson. And in the third and fourth paragraphs, Mr. Wilson says this: the current charge covers a period from the 1st of January 1997 to the 10th of February 2010. Is there any indication from the Horizon documentation, the defendant's bank statements, or any other material when this money first went missing? Can you confirm when the last audit took place, so that if necessary that date can actually appear in the indictment? At the moment, I suspect that this will be a case where Horizon itself is challenged, and as such, the prosecution will be under pressure to disclose a huge amount of Horizon data. It would therefore be extremely useful if we could identify something that assists the prosecution in pursuit of this criminal allegation. So it appears even at this late stage that nobody could pinpoint when the alleged loss first occurred. Is that right?
Yes.
Given all the doubt over the date in this case, did it not occur to you that you should seek further data from Fujitsu?
Yes, I presume it would.
Why didn't you?
I don't know. I can't recall that.
Did it not concern you as an investigator that a theft charge was proceeding when nobody could say when or how the loss occurred?
Well, yeah, it would have done. Asking that question, but I don't recall the reason why it wasn't obtained.
Going back, please, to the email from Mr. Wilson dated the 17th of November 2010. Could we have that back on screen, please? It's POL 000555783. This is the email we looked at a little earlier, and we looked at the first two paragraphs there. And the last paragraph here, clearly, if there were to be a plea to false accounting, but on the basis that the Horizon system was at fault, that would not be an acceptable basis of plea for the prosecution. Looking at the email below this is Rob Wilson to Diane Chan the day before, on the 16th of November. He says, Diane, have spoken to defence solicitor who indicated that the defendant may be willing to plead to false accounting and pay money back. Taken instructions from Chris, who has confirmed that he would be happy to proceed on this basis. Is the Chris there a reference to you?
I would guess it is.
Did you form any view at the time about the appropriateness of making a guilty plea to false accounting, contingent upon Mrs. Henderson not making reference to her belief that discrepancies were as a result of the Horizon system?
That, the wording of that, taken in instructions from Chris, who has confirmed he would be happy to proceed on the basis, I don't know why that's written like that, because they wouldn't have taken instruction from me on anything. So I'd have to query the meaning of that sentence.
Could we have on screen, please, document reference POL 000191111? This is a case file event log, and it relates this time to Alison Hall's case. Was this event log completed by you?
I believe, yes, it was.
There is an entry in it on the 30th of June 2011. If we can scroll down, please. You say here, phone call from Adrian Chaplin, barrister, while at Leeds Crown Court. Asked if we'd accept false accounting. I said we would, but nothing mention against Horizon. This is your note in which you say the plea was okay, but nothing mention against Horizon. You deal with this in your statement at paragraph 107. Could we have that on screen, please? It's page 37. You've dealt with this earlier in this paragraph, but as a point of general principle, about halfway down this page, you say, I have never had any involvement in making a plea deal or applying conditions to such a deal, and this would be outside of my remit as an investigator. Does that remain your position, notwithstanding the case event log that we've just looked at?
Yes, because that case, what I'm saying here, I've never had an involvement in. I'm trying to explain that case log, that I would have been passing on a message because the council had phoned me. I wouldn't have been given instructions. It would be more so passing on a message, because I wouldn't have been involved in plea deals or conditions or of any sort.
You have referred a number of times to the business line in relation to Horizon. In relation to your own involvement, particularly in the cases of Mrs. Hall and Mrs. Henderson, do you feel any responsibility for what happened to those two sub-postmistresses?
I was the investigator, so I guess they would be part of it, yes.
Sir, those are all the questions that I have for Mr. Knight. Do you have any questions before I turn to call participants?
No, thank you, no.
Miss Patrick has some questions.
Certainly.
Good morning, Mr. Knight. My name's Angela Patrick. I act with Mr. Maloney KC, for a number of sub-postmasters who were prosecuted and who have subsequently had their convictions quashed. We act including for Miss Henderson and Miss Hall, who sits next to me today. I want to ask you about two topics. And the first is about a document which is at Paul 00136-717. And this isn't a message that we'd have expected you to see at the time. I just want to ask you about it. And if we can start at page 2.
Excuse me, nothing's come up.
I'm going to say something
sorry.
for the document management team. If we can bring it up on page 2 at the very end, we can see where the email trail starts. And you can see there's we start with a request from Simon Baker, dated on the 9th of June 2013. And I'll take it very quickly there. It's about a spot review, which we understand were exercises that were conducted during the second site review. So not something we'd have expected you to see at the time.
Right.
And if we can scroll up, we see a reply to that email from Dave Posnett. And at the bottom of page 1, you can see the start of that. You see Dave Posnett replies on the 10th of June 2013. And what I want to look at, if we can scroll on to the next page, it's the first 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs there. And if you can read that to yourself, I'll read it for the record. I've read the associated document, and I would say there were issues. The scratch card process worked, but some SPMers, sub-postmasters, had trouble getting to grips and understanding it. The volume of TCs, which we know are transaction corrections, across the network were, I recall, a concern. I owned scratch cards as a fraud risk programme when I was fraud risk manager up until around May 2010. The problem was that scratch cards were the only product which wasn't simply remmed in and then sold. Instead, they had to be accepted on the lottery terminal as received and then activated as and when required on the lottery terminal, and remmed in on Horizon when activated, then sold, and then prizes and stock holdings recorded on Horizon as well as online sales. I ran a number of intervention and education initiatives and associate a zip file of 2 such initiatives, 1 and 2, both of which featured Hightown. Now, Hightown was Miss Hall's branch. So they weren't left to flounder, as seems to be the insinuation. There are also help guides and comms articles included, and I would think that Paul sent out many more comms to branches, and the lottery team made numerous TP calls each month, as well as the ops manual as a point of reference in branch. And he goes on, also in my file, and he refers to a spreadsheet. From this data, we determined branches that would be telephoned and branches that I would request an audit. If you see branches of concern tab, you can get a sense of the concerns around perceived scratch card holdings. There were many audit shortages, and scratch card holding concerns seem to highlight other problems at branches. Now, what I wanted to ask you, Mr. Knight, was a few questions. This seems to suggest that there were problems known to the Post Office arising from the management of lottery scratch cards in 2010. Is that fair?
That's what that seems to imply, yes.
And that those were problems that called at the time for initiatives and interventions on the part of the Post Office. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's what it seems to be saying, some sort of, clarity, yeah.
And that those initiatives included Hightown, which was Miss Hall's branch. That's recorded there in that message, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he goes on to say that there were many audit shortages and concerns which highlighted other branches. Now, this information about the education initiatives involving Hightown and that there was a known problem around scratch cards and associated audit shortages, is that something you would have known at the time you were investigating Miss Hall in 2010?
I don't believe so. I don't think I've seen this document or aware of the content of it.
And that content is all information that would have been relevant to your investigation, isn't it?
It would have been, yes, it would have been relevant.
Thank you. Can we move on to the second topic? And that's Miss Hall's interview. Now, you've answered a number of questions from Miss Price on Miss Hall raising Horizon issues and integrity and your failure to explore that as a reasonable line of inquiry. I only want to ask you a few questions about the interview to be absolutely clear on what she said to you. Can we look at Paul 30-21252, and that's the transcript of interview, and I'd quite like to look at page 11, please. And I'd like to start at the point where there is 00737, so 7 minutes and 37 minutes in, sorry, 37 seconds into the transcript, please. Sorry, if I can just catch up and check that we're all at the same place. So, we see there, can you see, Mr. Knight, at the top of that very page, you say, okay, can you tell me why there's a cash shortage of 14,000 in the account? Yes, can you
I
see
see
that?
that.
I'm going to read on just so
Okay.
that we can all be looking at the same thing. And Miss Hall says, well, I think it's all to do with the scratchers. I've been having problems with them for a while now, and I should have asked for help earlier on and I didn't. I can't see it being anything else. I know sometimes we get discrepancies for missing gyros and checks and stuff, but I don't think it's going to add up to that amount. And you go on, right, I'll ask you another question more. You said a while. And she says, can you put some time frame on that? I don't know really, it's just probably 6 months. And you say probably 6 months, yeah. And he says, so we're in, say, the beginning of September. And she says, I think it might have started at the beginning of the year, or when it started on building up. Now, stopping there, Miss Hall was referring to problems, and she thought the problems might be about the lottery, didn't she?
Yes, that's what we were talking about.
And that's just what she thought, wasn't it?
Yes.
But she was raising other issues, wasn't she?
Sorry, in what sense?
And she's saying the other problems, there's missing gyros, checks and stuff, discrepancies, it might not add up to that amount, but she didn't know what was
Sorry,
going
right.
on, did she?
Yeah.
She couldn't explain the shortfalls, could she?
No.
But she was telling you they'd been going on from the start of the year, and this was you in September, wasn't she?
Yes.
And that was a period of more than 3 months, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we can read on, she goes over. If we go over the page, just checking you can see it.
Yes, I can see.
It begins. She starts, and I've been trying to rectify it, and been calling the helpline, the lottery line, just trying to get everything sorted, and it's just got on top of me. And I actually asked for an audit myself. And you say, when was that? And she says, I can't remember the dates. I spoke to Denise at Chesterfield, and she put me in touch with another lady. I wish I'd have wrote it all, the reference number down, and I didn't, because I was just in such a state. But and you said, that's fine. When did you ring up? Sorry, when did you phone up? She said, this is before, when I came back off on holiday. It all started because the branch was rolling over. No, not the branch, the online, that we were going online. And you say, oh, you were going on to the next, changing onto the next generation. Yes. And she says, yes, onto the new change in that. So I spoke to Denise at Chesterfield, and she gave me another lady's number to ring, and I requested an audit because I wanted all this sorting out. So I've got nothing to hide. I just want it all sorting out so I can get back to my post. Right, you're saying, just go back. You said that it looks like it's been happening from the beginning of the year. You've had a problem. Yeah. Now, I just want to ask you a few questions. Stopping there, Miss Hall was telling you she knew she had problems and she wanted help, wasn't she?
Yes.
She wanted help to get to the bottom of it, didn't she?
Yes.
she'd been experiencing problems over many months, hadn't she?
Yes.
And that was at around the time of the transition to Horizon Online.
I believe so.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions for you, Mr. Knight. Thank you.
Mr. Jacob has some questions, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask you about Peter Holmes.
Okay.
I represent him and a large number of other sub-postmasters who were the victims in this scandal. Sorry, I just got to adjust my microphone so I can be heard. You have given evidence at paragraph 69 to 73 of your statement in relation to the prosecution of Mr. Holmes and your investigation of him.
I can't see anything. I don't know if you're showing me something, but
Okay.
sorry.
Perhaps if we could turn that up. WITN 08290100. That's your witness statement, and it's paragraphs 63 to 79. That's where you deal with Mr. Holmes's case. Oh, yes. We'll locate the page number now. It is 27. Thank you. Yeah, good. So you say that you were involved as the second officer in that case.
Yes.
Do you recall that you attended a search of Mr. Holmes's family home
I don't recall. I'm sorry. No.
with Mr. Daly? You don't recall that?
I don't recall it. No. No.
And you've answered questions from Ms. Price about what Mr. Holmes said at the interview that you attended. He said that he believed the Horizon system may have been responsible for the alleged shortfalls. He repeated his concerns of the Horizon system during the interview, and he said that he was hoping that error notices would have come back, but he thought it was something the computer had done or hadn't done. Those were his words, effectively. Now, his case was over. His conviction, his subsequent conviction, was overturned by the Court of Appeal and quashed in 2021. Mr. Holmes had died in 2015, so it was a posthumous overturning of his conviction. And the Court of Appeal found that Mr. Holmes's prosecution was an abusive process. They found that there was no evidence to corroborate the Horizon evidence. They found there was no investigation into the integrity of the Horizon figures, and they found that there was no proof of any actual loss to the post office. Now, can we look at paragraph 73 of your statement? So just scrolling down, please. Page 28, thank you. And you say, the inquiry has asked me for my reflections on the way that the investigation and prosecution of Mr. Holmes was conducted with regard to the Court of Appeal judgment, and I've just given you the findings of the Court of Appeal. And you say, from what you recall, you did not have any concerns with the way the investigation was run at the time as second officer. And the question that we ask you on behalf of Marion Holmes, who's the widow of Peter Holmes, is surely you must have been concerned when you were aware of this outcome from the Court of Appeal, that Mr. Holmes had repeatedly challenged the Horizon system and it was not investigated. Why didn't you, as an investigating officer, investigate the issue that Mr. Holmes had raised repeatedly at his interview?
I was a second officer, so I was literally there on the day. I wasn't investigating the case. I was there on the day to be a second person for safety and such other reasons, facilitate the interviews and searches and such like. So I was going by that, and obviously the case has been prosecuted. So I haven't subsequently, obviously, have you seen the overturned and the reasons for that? Then that was that. But at the time, I believed it was, from the bits I saw, that was fine. I wasn't involved in any other part of it.
Well, I appreciate, of course, that you were the second officer, and we're going to be asking very similar, if not the same, questions of Mr. Daly, who was the primary interviewing officer.
Right.
But surely, as an investigating officer, present and in attendance at that interview, when a sub-postmaster, as so many others did, is making these claims, wouldn't that, as an investigator, at least raise a few red flags in your mind? And wouldn't you have said, or ought to have properly said, well, surely we should look into this? Even though, as you say, you weren't leading the investigation.
I appreciate what you're saying. It's a very difficult question to answer, really, because, as I said to Ms. Price, it's from what we know, where we are now, looking back then. I don't think there was anything of that there wasn't a process in place to sort of raise it and discuss it, if that makes sense. Probably not a very good answer. I apologise.
I can see what you're saying. You're saying that there wasn't a set procedure.
Yeah, it wasn't like a
for
forum.
Looking into allegations that sub-postmasters made. Surely that's part of the investigating function, though, to follow things through.
Yes, it would be.
Right. And the final question in relation to Mr. Holmes is, with the benefit of hindsight, now you know what the Court of Appeal said. Do you accept that Mr. Daly and you failed properly to investigate Mr. Holmes's case in light of what he said at interview?
It sounds like I'm trying to cop out. I'm not. I was second officer. I was literally there on the day. So, yes, I appreciate, as you just said, what I would have heard and no action. What Mr. Daly did, I'm not fully aware. So that would...
Well, perhaps I'll put it in a different way. Yeah. As the second officer, do you accept that you should have done more to ensure that this case was properly investigated?
In hindsight, but as the process was back then, the second officer was just there on the day. Sorry if that's...
All right. Well, I'll move on. I want to ask you about Rita Threlfall. Right. And Ms. Price has asked you about your involvement in her interview. And if I could perhaps ask you, just to refresh your memory, to go to the if we could go to the document POL 00107-683, and it's page 3 of 9. And this is the document that Ms. Price took you through. It's the investigation report of Ms. Threlfall.
All right.
3 of 9, please. I think we can see, that's helpful, thank you, that it says I interviewed, and this is Mr. Bradshaw writing this, Ms. Rita Threlfall at Liverpool North Office, Crown Street, Liverpool. Present throughout the interview was Mr. Christopher Knight, fraud investigator, and that interview took place on the 10th of March 2011. And you've confirmed that you were there and present at that interview.
Yes.
Now, can we turn to the witness statement of Ms. Threlfall? And I'll give you the reference for that. It is WIT NO236 0100. And page 7 of 15, please. And I should make it clear that this isn't a document that you've seen previously.
Okay.
And if we could go, please, to paragraph 49. So we can see, in fact, starting at 48, I should say that Ms. Threlfall is wheelchair dependent and disabled. And she says, upon arrival, they left my husband and me in a hallway. We asked for a chair and never received one. I ended up having to sit down on the stairs. The interview room was upstairs, and I told them there was no way I could make it up the stairs. In order to make it to the interview room, I was placed in a tiny parcel lift. Now, Ms. Threlfall is watching this hearing today. She was going to give evidence in the human impact part of the inquiry, but was too upset to do so. And so on the 23rd of February 2022, Mr. Steen of King's Counsel read a summary of her statement to the inquiry. Do you recall this treatment of my client, Mr.
I don't, I'm afraid, no. I don't recall any of the that day.
It's quite striking, isn't it, that a disabled lady who is wheelchair dependent has an interview arranged up a staircase that she cannot access and is transferred to the interview room in a tiny parcel lift. Surely that is something that you ought to have remembered.
I don't remember it. Now, I would imagine when we interviewed, and I'm speaking sort of generically, if we interviewed people, then we would find a location. And I don't know whether, was this at a Royal Mail site?
She says Liverpool
Mail post office.
Sorting.
Yeah, it'd be a Royal Mail sorting office. So that would have been a room within that building. I'd imagine as a sorting office, the ground floor would be where they're doing their sorting. So this would have been up there. I didn't arrange it, so Mr. Bradshaw did. And talking about the tiny parcel lift, knowing Royal Mail buildings, it would be a lift. It would be a working, not a passenger lift as it were. It would be a working lift. I don't know the size of it, so it might have appeared to be a bit rough and ready, not as you would imagine a lift being in a superstore or whatever.
Well, her evidence, and this is evidence that's been received by the inquiry, is that it was a tiny lift. It was inappropriate. She is still shaken by that experience. She says in her evidence that she suffers from crippling anxiety and depression. Do you think this is any appropriate way to treat a disabled person who you're investigating, or at all?
It's not. No, taking this aside, everybody should be treated fairly. So I don't know the circumstances of what this lift was, tiny in comparison to what, and all I'm going by what I'm reading here is if you go into a first floor and there's a lift, then that would be the lift.
Well, given that she says it is a tiny parcel lift,
I can't argue either way. I don't know.
You're still a current employee with Post Office?
Yes.
Would Post Office put a disabled person into such a lift today?
I probably not, but I don't know what lifts whatever lift we had today. If we had a lift and somebody's going up to another floor, we would go in that lift. Over my years within the business, I've been in some buildings had very old lifts with the old shutter, the concertina shutter you pull across, and then that would go. Whereas now they're more modern. So I can't comment on what this was.
We can then go back to the statement, which is still on the screen. Paragraph 50, Ms. Threlfall says that she was interviewed under caution. She says the interviewer was horrendous. She had a solicitor with her and she provided a no-comment interview on advice. And then scrolling down very slightly, please, paragraph 52. She says, at the end of the interview, the Post Office investigator turned off the tape and the chap turned to me and said, do you wear a watch? I said, yes. And can I see your earrings and rings? What are the colour of your eyes? So I responded, and he said in a joking manner, good. So we've got a description of you for when they come. And she says, it was so awful, I nearly fell to the floor when he said that. I couldn't believe what I had heard. Now, it was Mr. Bradshaw who was the lead investigator.
Yes.
Do you recall these comments being made?
As I said, I don't, but I could give you an explanation of what I believe was taking place. Following an interview, and again, I'm not talking about this specifically, I'm talking about all interviews, we would have to fill a form out called an NPA 01, Non-Police Prosecution Authority 01 form. And on that form, there's lots of questions, and it's basically identifying a person. I think I think it mirrors if you get arrested by the police, you go into custody and they take fingerprints. So I think it mirrors that. So basically, you'd have your name, and then it would be male, female, left-handed, right-handed, scars, tattoos, distinguishing marks, build, and there'd be various questions you'd have to go through. So that sounds to me that is what is taking place there. Although she's not possibly describing it, she's describing how she took it, but that's what I would suggest is taking place.
Mrs. Threlfall, who's watching today, says that she believes, in her words that she's used to us today, she believes that she was deliberately persecuted. And the question I have for you is, was there a strategy or a tactic employed by investigators to unsettle or unnerve or intimidate sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses under investigation, to exert pressure upon them during interviews and in the investigating process?
No, not at all. Not.
Do you accept from Ms. Threlfall's evidence that is exactly what we see happening here?
It's her feeling, so I can't argue with how she feels. So if she's saying she felt like that, then I would have to accept that. But I don't believe that was how it was delivered.
And Mrs. Threlfall says the only motive for treating her in this way was to unsettle her, belittle her, humiliate her. And that was what Mr. Bradshaw was doing, and you were involved in that as the second investigator.
I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all, because if you're interviewing, it's putting somebody at ease rather than putting them on the, aggravating them.
I'm going to ask to see if I have any more questions. Mrs. Threlfall was originally prosecuted for false accounting and theft. The Post Office dropped the charges, and she was formally recorded as not guilty, as a verdict. She's watching today. As someone who was involved in her investigation, do you have anything that you'd like to say to her now?
There was no, well, as far as I don't remember it, but I would say there was nothing, as you've said there, malicious.
Are you sorry for the way she was treated?
If that's how she felt she was treated, then that's not nice for her.
Are you sorry how she was treated, or are you
I
sorry
don't
if that's
know.
how she felt she was being treated?
I don't believe I wouldn't have treated anybody disrespectively. So if she felt like that, then that's I'm sorry that she feels like that. But
Thank you. I haven't any further questions for you.
Anyone else?
So I think those are all the questions from call participants.
All right, thank you. I hope that Ms. Hall and Mrs. Threlfall have found today's proceedings informative. Thank you very much for making a witness statement and for coming to give evidence, Mr. Knight. I'm grateful to you. Where do we go from here, Ms. Price?
So if we can come back at 2 o'clock for this afternoon's witness, please, if we take lunch now.
Fine, all right.
Thank you.